everyone, I'm Kaitlyn.
And I'm Mo.
And this is Team Get Ovary It.
We're an all-female team participating in the greatest motoring adventure on the planet, the Mongol Rally.
We'll be driving 10,000 miles across mountains, deserts, and unknown terrain.
And along the way, we hope to spread our feminist and environmental ideals.
Join us here as we share our stories, thoughts, and interviews as we get ready for the Mongol Rally 2023.
Third time's the charm, I hope. Hello.
Hey.
Welcome back to this month's podcast episode. Kaitlyn has prepared something a little bit different for us today. Care to tell us what you're going to be talking about?
Yes. Recently, we were throwing around some options for our book club, and this book was one of the suggested readings. I was immediately interested, and I wanted to talk about it on the podcast as a kind of adventure story slash like book review.
Oh, all right. Well, sounds interesting. So, what was the book and what is it about?
So the book is called Tracks, a woman's solo trek across 1,700 miles of Australian Outback by Robyn Davidson. It's a story of a woman who decided to cross half of Australia through the desert solo in the late 1970s. Since I'm headed to Australia myself, I was immediately interested in the book. We didn't actually pick this one for book club, but I read it anyway, and I'm glad that I did.
So what's your overall impression of the book? Was it pretty positive then?
Yeah, it wasn't exactly what I was expecting. I thought it was going to be just a basic account of the journey,
Mm,
but it was a very diverse book and covered a lot of topics like environmentalism and indigenous rights. I wasn't really expecting that, and she didn't just give an objective description of the facts of her trip either. She wrote in all the good experiences and the bad, and she described in detail her emotions and mental breakdowns throughout the trip. Yeah, it was really touching and disturbing and exciting all at once.
yeah, you can't leave out those mental breakdowns because they're part of the journey, and
Yeah.
the good with the bad is what makes it great.
Yeah, no, no, true. And it makes it real also.
Hmm.
And even though the book has been in print since the 80s, the writing is still really raw.
Mm,
Robin herself admits that she wasn't much of a writer at the time that the book was published. And I noticed a lot of awkward grammar and typos while I was reading, but it didn't really detract from the story. Rather, it was kind of charming. And it made me feel like I was listening to her telling the story rather than reading it in a filtered book. Like it was more written in a kind of speaking style than it was in a writing style. And it
right.
was actually surprisingly easy to read, even if it was written that way. It was pretty cool. Like I mentioned, it had all the bad parts of the trip in it too. And,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it made me feel kind of icky reading it because they kept in the popular vernacular being used at the time,
Mm,
specifically with how certain people talked about Aboriginals in the area. Um, but I appreciated it because it really gave you a sense of what was going on at the time, and it helped me understand Robin's feelings and reactions better.
okay. I understand that there are books that I have read from like the 50s or the 60s, or they're like written in like the 70s even, and
Mm,
they still have like the N word in them every once in a while, and you're like,
mm,
I'm like, I understand why it's there because of the time it was written in, so
mm,
I get it, and it gives you the context for the situation of the story itself. But at the
mhm.
same time, I'm just like, oh man.
Yeah, like this book had one N bomb in it,
Hmm.
and
A couple
yeah,
of their
and I
derogatory
was like,
terms.
whoa, because she's very supportive of Aboriginal rights, and
Hmm.
when I saw the word, I was a little bit shocked. I was very shocked. But like that's just how people talked then, in Australia. And like even if you were a supporter of Aboriginal rights, then because it was just so popular to talk like that, I would assume I guess you would just talk like that.
Right.
So, instead of me thinking that Robin was racist, because like I know she's not, um, like it was just like, okay, well, this is what it was like. This is the
Mhm.
environment that people were living in, and
Yeah.
Alright. So it gives you, like, a better picture of what's happening.
Right. No, exactly.
Yeah, but
And
it was still jarring.
yeah, I'm
Um,
sure.
yeah. But, there's a lot of talk about, this in this book, but I wanted to touch on the theme of feminism that runs through it. I was expecting something vaguely feminist, obviously, it's like a book about a
Mhm.
solo female traveler, but
Right.
I was surprised at how often the author actually brought it up overtly.
Mm.
I don't get the impression that the motive for the trip was a feminist one, though I guess it was part, but, after reading, I wouldn't say that it's a feminist-focused book, rather, it's just one theme of many, but I wanna read some excerpts from the text that I thought were particularly poignant from a feminist point of view.
Alright.
Yeah, so
Read on.
thank you.
Oh,
So the
sorry.
book starts off and she goes to this place called Alice Springs, which is colloquially known as just the Alice. And it's kind of funny because, like, I was talking to my tattoo artist about, um, going to Australia, and he mentioned going to Alice Springs, and I was like, "Oh, it's in my book." Yeah, and he said his reaction was like, "Alice Springs is a weird place." And then so whenever she arrives in Alice Springs, because she's originally from Brisbane,
Mhm.
like, she talks about her arrival in Alice as if she's kind of going to an alien planet. Like, I guess, like,
Hmm.
the atmosphere there is just totally different than other places in Australia. It's more wild. It's a kind of an outpost. The people there have a different way of living, and at first, it was really hard for her to adjust, but living in Alice obviously changed her. So I wanna read, like, this part where she's talking about living in Alice. So she says, I had been in the Alice for almost a year now, and I was a changed woman. It seemed I had always been there, that anything I may have been before was a dream belonging to someone else. My grip on reality was a little shaky. I wanted to see my friends again because I was beginning to realize how removed from everything but camels and madmen I had become. The time with Kurt had had a weird effect on me. I was self protective, suspicious, defensive, and I was also aggressively ready to pounce on anyone who looked like they might be going to give me a hard time. Though this may sound like a negative quality, it was essential for me to develop beyond the archetypal female creature who from birth had been trained to be sweet, pliable, forgiving, compassionate, and doormatish.
Hmm.
So, and the part that I liked about that is, like, specifically the female creature part, because it's true, and,
Right.
like, I've had a lot of this conversation with one of my friends, one of my coworkers, she's from the Midwest in America, and I
Mhm.
think, like, Midwest kinda culture is really similar to Canadian culture, in particular, so, like, I totally get everything that she's saying. But it's true, like, her and I talk about, like, how from birth, girls are raised differently than boys are, and we are trained to be sweet, and it's like, my mom always told me that I had to be kind to everybody.
Right. Or that, it's better if you smile. Smile more or
Yeah,
things
like,
like
"You're a
that, yeah.
girl, smile more," and, like, "You need to use your charms," and, "You always have to be
You
nice,"
should
and
wear
my
a
friend from the
dress.
Midwest, like, she talks about, like, how, the men in their family, the brothers and, fathers and stuff would be more aggressive, but it was the woman's job to, I don't know, curtail the man's aggressiveness, but she herself could never be aggressive, and so she would just have to be, "Sweetie, you need to, and, my mom
Mhm.
always told me, like, whenever someone's being aggressive to you or being mean to you, you just have to reply to them in kindness, but, men are more taught that it's like tit for tat or an eye for an eye,
Mhm.
right? And it's just like yeah, and, like, I've been thinking about that a lot lately, and so I read that part of the book and I was like, "You know what? You're so right."
No, I see that in other
Mm.
people, but I love my mother because she didn't raise me that way.
Ah,
She
nice.
raised she raised me to be a strong, independent individual who fought for what I thought was right, fought for
Mm.
my feelings, and wasn't shouldn't be scared or ashamed to have my feelings and, you know, say what I wanted to say. And
Mm. That's great.
granted, I was a very shy child to begin with, and like I wanted to be a wallflower for the longest time, but
Mm.
I never felt like I had to be forgiving or compassionate to others except for what I heard from church, or I didn't have
Oh,
to
yeah,
be a
yeah, my
doormat
mom's a big
except
church
for all the things
person.
I heard from church.
Yeah, my mom was always like, "Turn the other cheek," and blah, blah, ugh. And
I'm
it
like,
took
"I'm
me
not gonna turn the other cheek if they ain't."
exactly, and, and, like, I don't want people to walk all over me, and anyway, so, yeah, thankfully, I'm, like, a really stubborn person, so I don't think I've ever been that particularly that sweet or pliable or
Mhm.
doormatish for that matter. Um,
But you grew up with that culture, hearing it
but
and
I did yeah, I
seeing it.
grew up with it, but it just, it went in one ear and out the other, thankfully. But, now as an adult, I'm kind of, like, looking back on the things that I heard when I was younger and, like, wow, that wasn't cool. Like, thank God it didn't actually stick with me at all, but
Right? Yeah,
I'd
I
be
know.
a totally different person.
I think the closest I ever got to hearing, like, my parents directly say anything similar to that, kind of ideal of, like, a woman being the quiet, submissive kind of person was,
Mhm,
there was one time where they were having a party and I was just being loud and trying to interject myself constantly, and I was, like, 8 or 9, and my
mhm.
mom's like, "Alright, Maureen, if you wanna be here, you need to be seen, not heard, so go sit over there and shut up." And I'm like, "Fair enough." And it was more just because it was an adult conversation, and while I wanted to be involved, they were having their adult time, so I had to
Yeah.
respect that. Is what it was more is what it was rather than you're a girl, you shouldn't talk kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, poor choice of words maybe, but I understand the
Mhm.
sentiment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Anyways.
That's so funny. But yeah, so like throughout so in her time in Alice Springs, she's changing and she's kind of progressively more and more like moving out into the bush. Like she,
Mhm.
kind of stops living in houses and lives in a tent for like forever and whatever. And she's interacting with all these different people. So she's changing a lot. And then before her trip, she kind of goes back to Brisbane to like talk to her friend Nancy and she's finding it hard to kind of connect with these people because like she's changed so much even like her best friend she's like what do I do and like I'm really different now so
Right.
she says this so she has this conversation with her friend Nancy before like leaving on her trip but after living in the Alice for a while and her friend says to her Rob, Robin, Rob, I really like what you're doing. I didn't understand it before, but getting off your butt and actually doing something for yourself is important for all of us. And I guess us meaning women. And
Mhm.
although I can't say I won't miss you like hell and won't worry about you often, I can say that what you're doing is great and I love you for it. It's important that we leave each other and the comfort of it and circle away, even though it's hard sometimes, so that we can come back and swap information about what we've learned, even if what we do changes us and we risk not recognizing each other when we return.
Hmm.
And I thought that was really powerful because and I think her friend is so supportive and so awesome,
Yeah.
and, like, and what she says is so true because, I think about this a lot, like, I'm very active on social media, and one of the reasons why is because it's just a great place to connect with people and share
Mhm.
information, and I
Yep.
think it's important for women to go out in the world and have these experiences firsthand so they can tell other women, their friends, their family members, whatever,
Mhm.
about what it's really like in the world because so many of us are kind of removed from the world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I share my story of like traveling to South Korea, traveling to Japan, traveling to Ireland by myself, and there are people who are just shocked. They're like, "You've traveled by like you went to South Korea. Was that military thing?" I'm like, "No, it wasn't military." I'm like, "Yes, I currently live near a military base, but just because just because I live here doesn't necessarily mean that the reason I went somewhere else was because of the military."
Mm,
I went by myself, and that like that aspect of it just shocks people. It's not
yeah.
necessarily the going to South Korea or going to wherever overseas, it's the I did it by myself because I could.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can give that like share that experience like
Mhm,
secondhand and hopefully inspire others. And I
mhm,
mean, and like that's what's happening here. And it's like, even though, we're gonna be apart and stuff, like, whatever you're doing is important for all of us, like as a collective. So I was
yeah,
like, that's and it's true. Like, I mean, what she did was really important for women as a collective. And she kind of touches back on that a little bit later as well. And then she has some like interesting quips about men also. And like part of her experience and part of her trip, and especially living in Alice Springs, was that she's kind of like, I mean, she's guilty of all like the rest of us are. Like sometimes we feel like we need a partner, we need that strong protective man. And and I've heard so many times from my girlfriends, like they say, like, I just like, I want a boyfriend who's going to protect me. Right? So I think a lot of us do have this idea and like, of
Eh,
this white knight who's going to save us and stuff. But she
I don't
throughout
necessarily
her
want a white knight. I just want somebody who can put up with my personality. Somebody
yeah,
who can
yeah.
match my personality and not be mowed over by it, I guess.
Yeah, oh, that's fair. That's fair. But like I know a lot of ladies here who,
Mhm.
they have that kind of idea and they're just like, "Oh, like, I don't go out without my boyfriend so he can kind of protect me from other men." And I'm like, "Okay, fair," cuz like the men here are super predatory. But at the same time, like it's kind of limiting in our own lives and then, and I
Right.
think having that feeling like I need to have a protector sort of limits you in a lot of ways. So and
Mhm.
she's realizing this when she's living in the Alice. So she said I had somehow always countered my desire for a white knight in shining armor by forming bonds with men I didn't like, or with men who were so off the air there was no hope of a permanent relationship.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because I have a friend who, like, she is so focused on just finding a partner that,
Mhm.
like, oh, well, like finding a man protector that yeah, she ends up dating these like really horrible guys and she stays in relationships for way longer than she should.
Right.
Yeah, and it's like this guy sucks, but I think like a lot of people don't want to be alone.
Mhm.
So anyways,
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of interesting. And so she's realizing this and didn't wanna be alone, and, at first, like, when she was living out in the bush, I think she found it very kind of alienating and almost kind of crushing in a sense, but then later she starts getting used to being alone, and she actually seems to prefer it. So she said, "So now, for the first time in my life, my aloneness was a treasure which I guarded like a jewel."
Yup.
Which I liked, and, as an like, I mean, people are really surprised when I say this, but, I'm introverted. Like, I
Yeah.
prefer being alone and doing things alone, so, like, I personally, like, I thought that line was really good, and I was like, "That's how I feel. I treasure my alone time."
I like my alone time, but my alone time is usually, like, me cooped up in my house doing stuff. When I'm traveling, I prefer to have a buddy just so I have somebody to
Mm,
talk to and share the experience with. But I
yeah, and I mean,
understand too.
and I guess when she says alone, she doesn't mean alone, alone because she had her animals with her, so she
Right.
did the journey with 4 camels and her dog.
Mhm.
Um, and, her dog became her best friend, but she started to kind of almost shun the company of other humans, but
Right.
in so doing, because she wasn't so, like, surrounded by people all the time, she was able to get more in touch with herself, like, her own
Mhm.
feelings and work out a lot of her own emotions, and she was also able to get closer to the earth. Like, she was talking about having this, like, really, deep connection with nature throughout the
Mm.
trip. Yeah, which was really cool. I thought that was neat. And
Nice.
I feel like that. I feel like when because I like traveling alone, and I feel like when I'm traveling alone, I have more of a connection with the place that I'm traveling to because I'm more focused on it instead of, like, being distracted by another person.
Right. That's
Yeah.
fair.
Plus, I just
I
like
mean
to do whatever I wanna do when I wanna do it, which I can do more freely, right, when I'm doing like, traveling alone.
Right, right. No, that's fair. And I'm generally like me and Jess found out that we're good travel buddies
Mm,
because I she generally has like a bunch of things that she wants to do and I'm just kind of like I'm along for the ride. I'm here to be here and experience the travel and like be in the country. I don't necessarily have plans of like I must go see this, I must do blah blah blah.
right.
I'm just kind of along for the experience to see what happens and enjoy it.
And I mean, and yeah, you and Jess and Sam, um, like, you guys are all like, even though I prefer traveling alone, I like traveling with you guys too because you guys have traveled so much and so respectful of other people's needs, and it's like, yeah, because like, Sam, like, when I was traveling with Sam in Bali, for example, she'd be like, "Oh, I just need to spend some time alone." I'd be like, "Okay, bye." And we'd,
Bye, I'll
like,
see
go
you
our
later for
separate
dinner.
ways. Yeah, like, it's like, "Oh, I wanna go see this thing, so I'm just gonna take off." And it's like, "Okay, bye." Like, that's the kinda, like, yeah,
Yeah,
if I'm gonna travel with somebody, that's the kind of person that I wanna travel with.
right.
Because, like, yeah, we need our own space sometimes, and, like,
Oh, hell yeah.
And I'm a big fan of, because like in Korea, the culture is very sort of like collective here. So like usually you do
Mhm.
things together in a group and you all do the same thing together and you're with each other all the time. And when I tell my students that I like to travel alone, they're always like extremely shocked, like more shocked than if I tell other people. And then for them they're just like, it's not so much the safety aspect, but they're always wondering if I feel lonely. And it's just cuz I'm alone, I don't feel lonely. And I think
Right.
for a while, like Robin on her trip, she was feeling lonely.
Mhm.
But then she kind of overcame that and she realized, oh, like, I'm not lonely. I have my dog, I have my camels, I have myself. And then she just
I may
started.
be alone, but I'm not lonely.
Yeah, and I thought that transformation was really interesting. Like as an introverted person, I was like, oh, I totally get what she's talking about.
Yeah.
But then there were times during her trip where she would have to stop in at outposts, I guess, and
Mhm.
stations. They call them kind of stations. For like I guess dotted all along the desert in certain areas, there are these really remote kind of outposts with like very few white people and kind of more aboriginals. And but like it's a lot of ranchers and it's
Yeah.
miners and just random government officials. Yeah, and these are people who are used to living off the land, so they're quite crusty. So she talks
Mhm.
about going into one place, and this is like after being alone for like, I don't know, a couple days or a couple weeks or something. And she walks into a bar and then she's talking about like these men having a conversation, like locker room talk, for lack of a better term. But she describes that like this. She says, I went into the bar for a beer, there to be met by a group of typical awkers, all talking as is their wont about sex and Sheilas. Oh, great, I thought. Just what I need, some intellectual stimulation. One of them, an ugly, weedy, pimply little brute, had been a milkman in Melbourne and was entertaining his mates with gruesomely detailed stories of his countless conquests of sex starved housewives. Another had been a tourist bus driver who said driving was a terrible ball drainer because all the women were always after his body. God knows there was enough of it. His beer gut was popping the buttons on his shirt. I left. Yeah, so she just like, she goes from
Uh,
that kind of revelation that she had earlier, you know, to being like, I kind of wanted a man so much that I would spend a lot of time with these gross men. And then she walks into this bar, witnesses that kind of man firsthand, and she's just like, "You know what? I'm outie," and then she just leaves immediately.
yep.
You
Walks
know,
into the bar, sees what's happening, goes, "Nah."
nah. Yeah, and I think, like, being on her own for so long, and it really made her realize that, she doesn't need the company of this kind of person anymore, and she's like, "You know
Mhm.
what? I'm just gonna peace out, bye." And I
I'm
thought
just
that
gonna
was
go
pretty
be over
cool.
here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm just gonna bounce and like, and how, and I think a lot of women have that kind of feeling also. Like, how many times have I been with a group of people? Like, well, it happened a couple weekends ago. Like I wasn't really participating in the conversation at all because I was like fine just sipping on my drink off to
Mhm.
the side alone. But like I was at the clubs and we ended up hanging out with these 2 dudes, and well, one of them I knew because he lives in my apartment building, so, we
Mm.
just kinda ran into each other, and I was like, "Oh, hey, like, we know each other," and then we ended up drinking with them, and, like, the men were talking about, like, really uncomfortable things, and I just, like, was like, "I'm
Mhm.
not gonna participate in this conversation," but I think a lot of women do have that, and they feel like because of what we were talking about before, like, being sweet and being accommodating, they feel like they have to put up
You d
with
yeah.
derogatory comments and crude language.
You don't feel like you
Um,
can say anything or get up and leave or be like, "Hey, that's not really appropriate. There are other people
yeah,
around."
but, like, and, like, here it is, she's like, after, like, having this realization, she's just like, "You know what? I'm outie, see ya." Like, I don't
Yep.
wanna listen to this. Even at the risk of, like, appearing rude or snobbish or whatever, right? So she's just like, "You know what? Bye, I don't wanna listen." So I thought that was really nice. Um, and then, like, throughout her journey, like, she's talking about being a woman and traveling solo and stuff, and, like, she's reflecting on the culture, I guess, in Australia and the relationships between men and women and, like, what men think of women and what women think of themselves. And then,
Mhm.
and she's spending a lot of time with Aboriginal people, and she has a really great respect for them. So she's like she's kind of learning a little bit of like one Aboriginal language. I'm not sure if it's like the predominant one or not. It seemed like it was. And she was talking to a lot of Aboriginal people, and I guess she was learning about them and about their culture. And so, and she says this, which I thought was interesting, but she said, I remember one story, which I have never had verified, but which rings true, concerning a myth belonging to some tribe in Western Australia. In the beginning, the women had everything. They had the power to procreate, they supported the tribe and kept them alive with their knowledge of bush foods, and they had a natural superiority. They also had the knowledge, which they kept hidden in a secret cave. The men conspired to steal this knowledge so that things would be more balanced. And like now, here comes the crunch. The women heard this and instead of stopping them, realized that this was the way things had to go for the sexes to remain in harmony. They allowed the men to steal this knowledge, which has remained in their hands until today.
Hmm.
Yeah, because I think she was remarking like I think this happened just after she had witnessed one of her friends had met his wife, and she was struck by, like, how he reacted to seeing his wife, like, she was describing his face as just being, like, so happy and respectful and kind of blissful and stuff, and she was surprised to see a man looking at his wife like that. And then it kind of, like, and then it sort of brought up this memory of this story. And I interesting that she's saying that, like, that didn't stop them from stealing that knowledge and, like, becoming superior, and they were just like, "Oh, this is the way." But it kinda reminded me of, like, what my middle, what's it called? Middle Midwestern friend had said that, like, women are supposed to be the arbitrators, I guess, and the peacekeepers, and,
Mhm.
like, this is kind of exactly what was happening here. Like, being a peacekeeper, and, like, just
Right.
kinda letting people walk all over them, and it also makes me think, like, if the positions had been reversed, like, if women were stealing this knowledge from men and men knew about it, they would've, like, dug their foots in and fought really hard.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah, they
Yeah,
would've been like, "No, no, you don't deserve to have access to this," or whatever. They would've said something along those lines. Maybe not deserve, but
yeah,
eh.
and, like yeah, and, like, I don't know if I like this story because, like, it's kinda making it seem like women are cool with men being superior to them for the sake of peace.
Mhm.
But that's obviously changing.
Right.
I think a lot of women are not cool with it anymore, but,
I
like,
think a lot of women are no longer okay with just keeping the status quo, which
yeah,
is what the story is kind of suggesting that women do, is be like, you know, it's okay to let them have steal this knowledge so long as it keeps the status quo, as long as it keeps the peace.
and this is, like, apparently, like, an Aboriginal story,
Mhm.
and what's the word? Like, as she says, it rings true. It might not be a true story, but it seems like because, like,
It's
this is sort of the story of, like, women all over.
right, it's the parable of women all over. There
Yeah.
used to be a lot more matriarchal societies out there, but they've
Mm,
all either died off or been killed off, culturally, in a sense,
mm,
because in Western cultures, it's more dominant for it to be a patriarchal society, and
yeah,
that's what a lot of people see and hear. And so, a lot of those cultures have switched or transformed.
and it's interesting, like, what is it? Just the coveting of the power too.
Hmm.
'Cause I don't think women covet power, and, like, that's kind of what's happening in this story too, like, women don't covet power the same way that men do,
Right.
and I've been noticing this, like, with a couple of, like, my male friends and stuff, um, and these days, like, with so many men following the likes of Joe Rogan and, like, Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate, to be honest, I've never read any of their stuff, but, like, just from how people talk, like, how men talk about those men, I can
Hmm.
get an idea of what those men are,
About.
touting, and it's usually about power. It's like, "You're a man, you need to get power, and you need to do this to get power," and I just don't understand why they need to have so much power. Like, why are you coveting it so much? And, like, I guess, like, this is what that story is. It's about, like, coveting power and, like, women don't and men do.
Right.
It's really interesting. So, anyway, it's an interesting story, so I wanted to put it in. Um, and the story exists kind of everywhere. And then so and like I said it before, so she's traveling through the desert. She's not exactly alone. She has her camels, and then her love of animals comes up a lot in the story. Like she talks about how much she loves the camels, and she talks about like having a baby crow, and she has her dog, and she had two dogs at one point, but one of them died.
Aw.
And but she's also like she is an animal lover, but at the same time, she also talks about, like, hitting the camels, like, whenever they're acting up, she, like, smacks them, and she shot one of her camels, like, her camels was really sick, and I mean, like, I guess it's a
Mhm.
mercy, but, she shot one of her camels, and even she had a pet crow at one point, and the way that she got her pet crow was extremely violent. It wasn't exactly her, it was, another person who did this, but she was there as a bystander and she didn't stop it. But they just
Right.
knocked a nest out of a tree and there were like a bunch of baby crows in it, all of which died except for one. So she
Mhm.
kind of like, because she wanted a pet crow, she caused the death of three.
Right.
Right. And like, so like she's an animal lover, but like there's also this violence, which is kind of interesting.
I understand it because I grew up on a farm and I work
Right.
with farm animals and I love my dogs, but at the same time, I raise chickens for meat.
Right.
And so, I have to take care of that messy process so that I
Hmm.
can have food in my stomach. And it would shock a lot of people to hear about it and to have to deal with that or do it themselves, but for me it's just, it's a thing that I do because that's just how I live. But that doesn't stop me
Yeah.
from loving animals.
Yeah, and, like and then she's in the bush, like, she's working on a kinda camel farm ranch sorta
Mhm.
thing, and, like, they have to be able to control it. Anyway, so, like, it was interesting, but she is an animal lover, so and then she said she said this, which I guess is kind of true 'cause I get this, but she says, "Animal lovers, especially female ones, are often accused of being neurotic and unable to relate successfully to other human beings. How many times had friends noted my relationship to Diggity?" That's her dog.
Mhm.
And with that baleful look usually associated with psychiatrists, said, "You've never thought of having a child, have you?" It's an accusation that brings an explosive response every time because it seems to me that the good Lord, in his infinite wisdom, gave us three tilings to make life bearable: hope, jokes, and dogs. But the greatest of these was dogs. But especially that part where it's like, "Oh, you love your dogs that much? You've never thought of having a child?"
Right. Well, I mean, there's so many people who start off with and you'll hear them talk about, especially in the US, they'll be like, "Oh, here's my baby. Let me show you the pictures of my baby," and it's their dog and or their cat, and everybody's just like,
Right.
"Don't aren't you planning on having kids?" And it's like, "Well,
No,
yeah, eventually, maybe, but for right
maybe.
now, this is my
Uh,
baby."
but it's also that, like 'cause she's saying, like, people would look at me like I was crazy
Right.
because I prefer dogs than having a child, pretty much.
Right.
And I'm like, "Man, bruh," like, I mean, I like cats too, but I don't have any pets at the moment. In general, I don't want kids, but I can relate to that whenever I tell people, "Oh, I don't want kids." And especially in Korea, because like, the goal
The
for
look.
men and for women is both. It's like to, like, get married, have kids, get married, have kids. It's like what the government pushes, that's what parents push, it's what everyone pushes. And so, like, when my students ask me, because it comes up often, "Do you wanna get married?" I don't wanna get
No.
married to anybody. And they are shocked, and then their follow-up question is always, "Well, what about children?" And I'm like, "I don't wanna have kids." And then they're double shocked. "How could you?" And, like, even, like, in Korea too, 'cause we're experiencing such a horrible birth rate, like, our birth rate is very low, and it's really concerning a lot of people and especially the government. And,
Mhm.
there was an article that I read about a year ago, I think, where this government minister actually said that women were selfish for not having children. And but I think a lot of people have that kind of sentiment, and not just in Korea, but also abroad. And it's
Mhm.
like because women are like the Aboriginal story said, like, women are the life givers. So if you want to have more people on Earth, then you need women's compliance for it, and then if women don't comply, then you're kind of shit out of luck.
Yep.
So so that
But
that reaction is pretty common from people when you say you don't
at
want
the
to have kids.
I mean, at the same time, though,
Mm,
isn't there a statistic out there that's saying that if the birth rates globally
mhm.
continue the way that they are, that we will outpace what resources we currently have available to
Yeah,
feed
I
all the people on the planet.
that's what I've said to, like, a lot of my students. So anyway, and then so back to Robin. So she's we have friends like John, for example. We did an interview with him earlier.
Mhm.
We have friends who do through hiking, which you're just alone-ish, like in the woods for months on end, and you kind of end up going a little bit crazy, for lack of a better word, but you're not crazy, but you're just thinking in a very different way.
Yes.
And you sort of become desocialized, I think is a better word. So while
Mm.
she's walking, she's really getting desocialized. And she talks about it a lot. And it's always really interesting when she does talk about it because you're like, I understand the mindset that she's in. And I go, yeah, yeah. So this part, she talks a lot about like how she's changing. So here she says, by now, I was utterly deprogrammed. I walked along naked, usually clothes being not only putrid, but unnecessary. My skin had been baked a deep terracotta brown and was a constituency of harness leather. The
Mm.
sun no longer penetrated it. I retained my hat because my nose had peeled so often I thought it might disappear altogether. I might be left with just a bare lump of sizzling cartilage sticking out there. And I honestly could not remember or put into context etiquette. Did it matter? I would think to myself, if all the buttons had gone from my shirt and trousers, would anybody notice or care? And what about menstrual blood? From my position, it didn't matter a damn whether it followed the natural laws of gravity and ran down my leg the way it was meant to do. But would others feel the same? Would it make them confused and unhappy? But why on earth would it? I wouldn't cover a cut in embarrassment, would I? I was in an agony of confusion because I just didn't know. I'm amazed at how quickly and absolutely the sense of the importance of social customs fell away from me, and the awareness of its absurdity has really never left me. I have slowly regained a sense of the niceties, but I hope, that I will always see the obsession with social graces and female modesty for the perverted, crippling insanity it really is.
Nice.
Nice. Yeah, right? Yeah, like I liked that, and I liked especially that last part because it is crippling and it's perverted.
Mhm.
It's very strange. This whole like female modesty stuff, and luckily we were born in an age where women could wear pants comfortably, and it wasn't really a big deal. But like this is like, and she's talking about this is the late 1970s,
Yeah.
and even my mom, because like my mom was born in 56, Robin was born in 50, and like my mom was saying, in her circles, in her time, it was really rare for women to wear pants.
Mhm.
And,
You're still
she
wearing
she remembered.
dresses, skirts.
Yeah, like they exactly. And then so she remembered like getting comments from people when she did wear pants. And
Mhm.
and she thought she was like a huge badass for like going around in pants. And it's like, so that's like what's happening here. So I mean, and we still do experience some of that today. And it's like, you're a woman, you shouldn't do that, or you're a woman, you shouldn't talk like that. And it's like, it's
Or
weird.
yeah. Or, on the extreme side when there's victim blaming for
Oh
situations, or
god, yeah.
what, "Oh, well, what were you wearing?" It's like, it doesn't matter what I was wearing. I'm
Yeah.
the victim. Why are you trying to put the blame on me and my clothing? Like,
Yeah.
fuck you. Sorry.
No, you're right though. Like, I mean, yeah, that's so true. And
That's a very extreme example, but yes.
yeah, yeah. But I think we've all experienced that. And well, it kind of brings to mind because I was talking about this recently, but I think I don't have the confirmation because I never got like tested, but I'm pretty sure I got like drugged once.
Oh, shit.
And I remember telling people about it and they were like, "Oh, maybe you shouldn't go to bars anymore."
You're like, "Oh, yeah, sure,
And I was like, "Why?"
Why should I have to stop going to bars because somebody drugged me? Because
Yeah, and it's
somebody
just
thought
like,
that it was a great idea to put something unwanted, unwarranted into my beverage."
and a lot of people tell me, like, there are those very conservative people who are like, "Oh, you're a woman and you go out and drink." with strangers. Like, that's not what you shouldn't be doing that. It's not part of female modesty or
Mhm,
blah blah blah. And like see what bad things happen to you when you do that. And it's like, what a crazy way of thinking. And it's just like, and like that's where she's at. Like she's kind of thinking about these norms, quote unquote norms, in a critical
mhm.
way, and she's realizing that it's crazy.
Yeah, 100%.
I know, and like, and people might call her the crazy one, but who's
Mhm,
really crazy, right?
right. Is it society in general that's crazy, or is it her me, the individual, who has decided to step outside of society's norms? Who
Right.
knows? But I definitely am on board with the whole, like, I shouldn't have to worry about whether or not I'm gonna get drugged when I go out to have drinks with people. But I'm always worried about it, so I'm constantly, like, I follow 2 rules when I'm outside drinking with people.
Mhm.
1, if I put my drink down, the drink is dead to me. It no longer belongs to me. It belongs to the wind.
Yeah.
Because who know if somebody's touched it, somebody's drinking from it or whatever. It's gone. It
Mm.
no longer exists. And then 2, if I'm getting a drink, whether it's somebody buying me a drink or whatever, unless it's a trusted friend, I go to the bar and watch that bartender pour that drink for me so that I know going into it.
'Cause, like, I just get caught up in, like, having fun and stuff, and I'm guilty
Mhm.
of, like, leaving my drinks out and not watching people. Don't be like me. Um,
I'm
yeah,
just
I'm
I'm just
not as
saying, as
vigilant
as
as I
Caitlin's
should be.
as Caitlin's friend, there have been a couple of times where she set her drink down, and I purposely, without you noticing, took your drink and moved it way, way away, and or like
Thank
just
you.
threw it away for
I
you.
appreciate it.
I'm watching out for you. So there's a reason why some people call me the mom of the group.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. Cause like, oh god, Lord knows I don't really watch out for myself, but yeah. But all good advice. Please do that, out there, everybody. Because like, I had a male
Not just
friend
not just
who
girls, guys too. Yeah.
yeah, like, I had a male friend who got drugged, so everybody, like, watch your shit.
Yep.
This also goes hand in hand with what we're talking about, but she talks about this as well. She says, and I just thought this part was really funny, but also true. So she says,
Mhm.
in fact, to this day, I think one of the major breakthroughs I made on that trip was learning the gentle art of farting. I had never farted before. Well, maybe
Please.
once or twice, but then only pathetic little. God knows what happened to all that air. Must have seeped through the pores of my skin at night, I suppose. But now I could blart with the best of them. Good, solid bass thrums, which spooked the camels and scared flocks of spinifex pigeons into the air. Diggity and I had competitions. She always won for poisonousness, I for sonorousness. So I guess her dog had really stinky farts, but like, hers were
Yup.
really loud. And I totally get that because like I guess like well, my mom was pretty like open with farting. If it was just us, but like, in
Mhm.
public you can't do that. You can't burp and fart in public. And then but then when I like started living with roommates and stuff, like, at first I was like really careful with my bodily functions like farting and burping and stuff. And then you know what? Like at some point there was a breaking point and I was like, bro, this is my house. I want to be comfortable in my own house. I'm gonna like burp and fart around you guys. And they were just like, sounds great, us too. And then so we would just like let her rip. And like, my roommate would let a fart out and I'd be like, 8 out of 10. Not bad. we would
A little
literally like
flat.
we would
Yeah, yeah.
literally judge each other's like
Yep.
burps and farts and stuff. And it was great. And it was so nice. And
I
it
did that with my roommates at college too.
yeah.
And then we also terrible game. It was an all girls dorm, so it was just literally 8 of us girls living in
Uh,
this dorm room together. And we barked and farted occasionally, and, like, made jokes and, like, rated each other depending on who was in the room.
yeah.
We'd also walk around, like, in the morning after we got dressed, or if we were, like, waiting for other people to get dressed and get ready for, like, a night out. We just, like, walk over and be like, "Hey, how's it going?" And, like, poke them in the boob, be like, "Is that your nipple?"
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It was like a terrible game. I hate admitting that we did that, but it's also like a thing we did because we were all so comfortable with each other, because we
Yeah.
were like, yeah, farting, burping, whatever, it's bodily function. We're just gonna go for it.
Yeah.
And a little further too.
But, like, sometimes when I'm, like, telling people, like, I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, like, we did this when we were living together and et cetera," and they're a little bit mortified, and they're like, "You're a girl, you shouldn't do that," and it's like, "Oh, man, fuck off." Like,
Right?
girls gotta fart too.
Right? Everybody farts, get over it, yeah. I honestly have not run into anybody who's just, like who has said that to me in public since I turned, like, 18.
Mm,
Nobody has publicly tried to shame me or, like, personally tried to shame me for farting or burping in public. It up until that point, though, I had gotten a couple of, like, "Oh, you really shouldn't do that in public," or, "Oh, don't be like that."
yeah.
And I will admit I crop dusted my kids a couple
Oh my
times.
god, I crop dusted the kids all the time.
I was just
All
like,
the time.
I gotta fart, and I can't, like, leave the classroom, so guess I'm making a lap."
Yeah.
It was terrible,
Just
I'm sorry.
yeah. Anyway, no, it's true, it's true, I used to do that too. Oops. But
Oops.
alright, so the next part is kinda long, but, like, this is really she ended up, like, to help her fund her trip,
Mhm.
she because it was supposed to be, like, just, like, a personal journey, but she ended up making a deal with National Geographic, and they gave her some money to, like because
Oh,
she was
okay.
pretty broke at the beginning of it, so she needed the money to, like, get her gear and get ready.
Yeah.
But she felt really horrible about it, like, she felt like she was ruining the trip somehow even when she did that. She did
Mm.
not want publicity, that's not the reason why she did this, she didn't wanna become famous at all. And then, suddenly, like, near the end of her trip, people were starting to, like, try to track her down so they could get interviews with her and photos and stuff,
Oh.
and she couldn't really understand why she was so famous. Because she's like,
Mhm.
"I'm not really like, I mean, what I'm doing is, like, cool, I guess, but it's," she says, "it's not to this level."
Right.
So she couldn't understand it. So then she was thinking about it, and, like, this was her conclusion. It's a little long, but I think it's good. So she says, "And it was only then that I realized what I had let myself in for, and only then I realized how bloody thick I had been not to have predicted it. It would seem that the combination of elements, woman, desert, camels, aloneness, hit some soft spot in the era's passionless, heartless, aching psyche. It fired the imaginations of people who see themselves as alienated, powerless, unable to do anything about the world gone mad. And wouldn't it be my luck to pick just this combination? The reaction was totally unexpected and it was very, very weird. I was
Hmm.
now public property. I was now a feminist symbol. I was now an object of ridicule for small minded sexists. And I was a crazy, irresponsible adventurer, though not as crazy as I would have been had I failed.
Mhm.
But worse than all that, I was now a mythical being who had done something courageous and outside the possibilities that ordinary people could hope for. And that's the antithesis of what I wanted to share, that anyone could do anything. And if I could bumble my way across a desert, then anyone could do anything. And that was true, especially for women who have used cowardice for so long to protect themselves that it has become a habit. The world is a dangerous place for little girls. Besides, little girls are more fragile, more delicate, more brittle than little boys. Watch out, be careful, watch, don't climb trees, don't dirty your dress, don't accept lifts from strange men. Listen,
Mhm.
but don't learn, you won't need it. And so, the snail's antenna grew, watching for this, looking for that, the underneath of things, the threat. And so she wastes so much of her energy seeking to break those circuits, to push up the millions of tiny thumbs that have tried to quelch energy and creativity and strength and self confidence, that have so effectively caused her to build fences against possibility, daring, that have to effectively kept her imprisoned inside her notions of self worthlessness. And now a myth was being created where I could appear different, exceptional, because society needed it to be so. Because if people started living out their fantasies and refusing to accept the fruitless boredom that is offered them as normality, they would become hard to control. And that term, camel lady, had I been a man, I'd be lucky to get a mention in the Walloona Times, let alone international press coverage. Neither could I imagine them coining the phrase camel gentleman. Camel
Mhm.
Lady had that nice, patronizing, belittling ring to it. Labeling, pigeonholing, what a splendid trick it is.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I like that last part because especially, like, that part where she's talking about, how because of what we're told as we're
Mhm.
growing up, like, "Don't do this, don't do that, don't get your dress dirty, don't accept lifts from strange men." That's a good point, like, probably don't do that. But I don't mean to say that it's not, because the world is dangerous for women. The
Mhm.
world is kind of scary sometimes, but I think
You shouldn't let that stop you from
doing what you want, yeah.
exploring your dreams and exploring in following the possibilities that you have in your mind.
Yeah, exactly. And like, that's kind of how I live my life. And like, I'm not unaware of the danger at all, but at the same time, like I just don't want to let my fears for things stop me from doing what I want to do. So, and a lot of people think that I'm crazy and that, well, I'm cool with that. But so I said, like throughout this whole book, I found myself relating to the author more than I thought I would. The way she talks about being in the desert and having to readjust to society and the reverse culture shock and going crazy really
Mhm.
reminds me of through hikers, like I mentioned, and even how I sometimes feel coming back after a trip or like when I went back to work after quarantine or something.
Mm,
And that last bit that I read out, really hit me because I often have thoughts like this myself. I don't think she's saying that women shouldn't be cautious because that's how you end up dead in many cases, unfortunately.
mhm.
But, I think we let our field rule our lives and, prevents us from being free. I love traveling alone. And when I tell people my travel plans, they are always pretty shocked. I don't think they have the same reaction when a man tells them that they're doing some
Right?
solo trip. And like my female friends and family sometimes say that they wish they could do what I'm doing. And I'm like, "You can though."
The only thing I wish is that I was still in Korea.
Yeah, and like echoing what Robin said, "I'm just a person the same as anybody else. If I
Mhm.
can do it, others can, and you know what? Others can probably even do it better than me." But it's
And
like
others have and are doing it too.
yeah, but it's like, we've let our own fear and society's contrivances, like, influence us too much to the point where we've half willingly stifled our own existence. It's really devastating. It's really bad, and part of the reason why I do what I do is because, I wanna do those things, so I just do them.
Mhm.
But, the other part is, like, because I kinda wanted to stick it to people. Well, it's I see their shock, and I see their kind of, like, tisking and stuff as a
Mhm.
challenge,
Yeah, of
and
course.
I wanna challenge society too at the same time. I wanna stick it to the patriarchy and just be like, "Look at me, I'm going."
Yep. Well, I was the same way. Like, when I was in high school, I wanted to travel to China,
Oh,
and I
yeah.
did. But it was a group. It was as a group with a lot of my classmates, and it was
Mhm,
mostly boys, and there were a few girls.
mhm,
And I was one of the only students who went who actually had taken Chinese or Mandarin
mhm.
during high school. Like I was the only one who took Mandarin classes
Oh.
who went. And I was like, why is nobody else from my class who's like learning Mandarin going on this goddamn trip? Why?
Mm.
But anyways, so it was just really interesting. And then like later on, when I went to Japan for my study abroad, a lot of people were really shocked that I was going by myself.
Oh,
I was
yeah.
like, "Oh, are you traveling? Like, are you going with a program? Are you going with a group of people?" I'm like, "Oh no, I'm just going by myself." Like the program's through the school, but like I'm traveling by myself alone to Japan, to a school I've never been to before, and it's gonna be fine. And they're just like, they were so shocked. And some of the guys were like, "Oh, but is that safe? Are you gonna be okay?" And I'm like, "It's Japan, please."
Mm.
Japan is like one of the safest countries. Like, calm down.
Yeah.
And then it happened again when I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna go to South Korea." I got a lot of the looks, a lot of the tisking, a lot of the, "Are you sure? Is that safe? Well, what if you get kidnapped?" And I'm like, who's gonna kidnap this 5'8", almost 200-pound woman? Nobody. Nobody's gonna try and kidnap me because it requires a lot more effort than they're willing to put in. It was just really interesting because I have experienced that, and it wasn't just from men; it was also from other women. And I was just like,
Yeah.
guys, like if you want to go travel. And like I hear so many people say, "Oh, one day," or "Oh, someday soon," "Oh, in the
Mm.
future." Like I had, oh, sorry. Last thing. I had a high school buddies, like four high school friends that were super I was super tight with, and we're all like, one day we're all going to live in Japan together. It's going to be great. I'm the only one who's spent any extended time in Japan.
Yeah.
Well, this book is definitely on my to read list. I think
Yeah.
I was actually the one who recommended it as like a
You
couple of
were.
options. I was
You
like,
were.
this one sounds good, and this one, and this one. Granted, I have had no time to do any reading whatsoever because my entire life is absorbed with schoolwork. But
Uh,
anyways, I think that's enough for today if you're willing to call it an end. All
yeah,
right.
I'm good.
So if you liked today's episode, please like, comment, subscribe, and share on whatever platform you're listening to this on. It really helps us out.
And consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Patrons get access to exclusive content, AMAs, and more. All proceeds will be donated to the Center for Reproductive Rights and Cool Earth. All links in the description.
Check out our website, social media pages for updates and blog posts. Links in the description.
Thanks again and see you next month.
Bye.
Bye.
That's it for today, folks.
Thanks so much for tuning in.
And as always, please support this work by subscribing and donating to our cause at www.teamgetoveryit.com.
Donors get access to specific content like stickers, t-shirts, and postcards from our journey.
You can donate for as little as $5 and the benefits build from there.
Go to our website for more info.
Or find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Team Get Over It.
Thanks for listening.
And catch us next time on Get Over It.
Okay, so I'm just I used to have like 2 screens, but I sold my monitor, so I only have the 1 screen. So I'm just, I can't see you. I'm just gonna talk and read the screen.
That's fine. I'll just make faces at you.
Okay. Oh, and you start
Okay.
whenever you're ready.
3, 2, 1. Kaitlyn has prepared.
So where did I write this? Yeah,
I can't talk. I'm sorry.
that's good. I think that's a good episode. It's not bad.